Well, we do have backup boards just in case, and I will just go ahead and start. My name is Mark Cosmos. I'm a landscape architect with the City of Eugene. We thank you for coming, and we know that some people have already said we may not be able to stay for the whole thing, so since I won't be able to catch you later, we do have paper copies of the surveys at the back. If you can raise your hand, please, where those are. Thank you. Right up there, actually next to the sign-in. But we do have an online survey that we will flip the switch on and make live right after this meeting. That's the best way to capture all of your feedback. Thank you. We're going to start today with a little project overview, help everybody get their bearings, understand what the site is. Then we're going to go ahead and take a few questions, do as a big group, and this is a big group. Our team members here will be facilitating that. And then after that, we're going to break up into small groups and have some small group discussions. That really allows everybody to have a voice and to speak up and to say something. We found that works very effectively, and we hope you'll be able to do that with us. So, and the nice thing is we already have some groups here at the table, so that's good. And one last reminder, if you haven't signed up already, how many people have not signed up online? Okay, 1, 2, okay, so that's good. There is a sign up for those who haven't. It basically gives you an announcement anytime there's an update on the website, if we have a schedule, the next meeting coming up, etc. So it's your first avenue to get information from us without having to go look for it. With that said, I think what I'd like to do is give us a little walk through the site. Somebody switched the screen on me. There we go. Thank you. Great. So I'm going to use the pointer here. We'll see if this works well. Golden Gardens is a 223-acre park. It is located in northwest Eugene. And as a couple of points of reference that should help people, we have Highway 99 right here on a diagonal. There's the Beltline, which exits on Barger, and most people know to get to the park now, you come up Golden Gardens Drive, which comes in right here and tees at Jessen. The site is this boundary here, and what most people understand of the park right now is having walked the trails right here. So if you've been there in person, even myself, when I came back and we started looking at the site, and we took some news crews out on interviews and pointed out this little group of trees out here and said, well, that's the far edge of the park site. And everybody said, whoa, we didn't know it was going to be that big. So that said, we do have a lot of space to work with. We also have on site an A2 channel. So this is an extension of the Amazon Creek. This takes our stormwater and floodwater and conveys it safely throughout the city. So that's a channel that has a formal bridge crossing right now. And also the land that's currently around the park. Right now, we, the city, manage this park as one of our natural areas. And pending the development of the rest of the park, this whole area right here, the brown, is currently being leased out for agriculture. That allows us to conserve our resources. Their use of the land is good. It keeps down on the weeds until we're ready to start developing infrastructure, et cetera, for the park. So, that said, let's go ahead and walk you through a couple of site photos. So, this first big one here, we're looking north. We're hovering above the biggest pond, and as you know, there's a gravel walkway that runs a diagonal through the site and pops out on the north end. So way back there on the edge is Clear Lake Road running east and west. This image in the upper right is looking due west from the middle of the two ponds. You can see that A2 channel continues here. The rest of it's behind us in the photo. This is looking a little bit more northwest. So remember that group of trees I pointed out earlier? That's that group right there. And this edge is the edge of that development. So when you're standing here, it's really hard to focus that far. The bird's eye helps a lot, the bird's eye photo. And then, of course, down here on the lower end, this is looking southeast, back towards the neighborhood. This little parcel of land here, that's the one that is available for the neighborhood park development. It's right next to Justin Street. It's directly accessible by the neighbors. So of the three elements that we're talking about this evening, that one there's a lot of thought and reasoning to working with that piece of land for the neighborhood park. So that said, everybody can still hear me okay? Good. I'd like to walk us through a quick timeline, and this will be available on site, so you can read it in a lot more detail, but we do have a lot of material to get through. And one thing we like to do is recognize the land that we're on, and the city of Eugene is built upon the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya peoples and acknowledges the inherent sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribal nations of the state of Oregon. Kalapuya descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and of the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon. And they continue to make contributions in their communities here and across the land. So what most people think back to as a recent history, our past, of the site started around 1950 when Lane County owned the land, and you may know that those ponds used to be gravel, a gravel operation. So what was left behind was a series of gravel pits. Lane County then took that land over. That gravel was used for the construction of the Beltline. And shortly after that, City of Eugene took on ownership of this in the mid-70s. So at that point, this was still just a complete undeveloped leftover series of ponds from the gravel operation. Unfortunately, then there were a handful of tragedies that happened, some drownings with some of the local neighborhood kids. And so at that point, the city went in and made some safety as well as habitat improvements and really started developing that land. That's what spurred it, became a catalyst for really thinking about this as a resource and start to planning for the future. Then in about 2005 or so, there was a first round, a long-term vision of what this site could be. And at the time, it was a little bit smaller. I'll let Carolyn explain that in just a minute here. But the idea of a sports complex with a nature area, in balance with the nature area, is not a new thing. It's not a this year thing. That's something that's just come up. We've been planning this for a long time. And what's important to know is that the public process is very important to us. We want to not only learn what we can moving forward, we're going to step back and we're going to confirm and acknowledge some of the past planning that's done and make sure the things that we thought we needed and wanted back then are still valid. That's part of the process, and we're glad to have you with us as part of that. So from there, of course, land has increased. It started with several acres up to hundreds, and we're now at 223. Carolyn, I think I'm stepping on your slides here. It's that orange one there for the...
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right. My name is Carolyn Burke, and I can't see when I have my glasses on, but I'm the Parks and Natural Resources Planning Manager for the city. And of course, I can't read my notes without my glasses. Back in 2006, I was the project manager for this planning process. Was there anybody in this room who was a part of that or remembers that planning process? One person? Yep. Okay. Well, it's a good thing I'm going to review it then. So at the time, we had some money to make some short-term improvements that were focused on safety, access, and pond enhancements. So those short-term improvements were put in place, and that included a vehicular bridge over the A2 channel, laying back the banks of all of the ponds to make them less steep, and then planting them with native vegetation, and with the help of a lot of dedicated volunteers building the trail system that is out there today. At that time, we also thought about what we wanted this place to be for the long term. And at the time, the community came up with this vision that you see that included athletic fields, 4 baseball, softball fields, and 4 rectangle fields, a dog off-leash area, BMX, parking, and neighborhood park amenities. So since that time, since 2006, we purchased 170 acres more. So we purchased all of this land, well, all of that, yep, there we go, all of this land, and this access up to Clear Lake Road. Since that time, we've also done a lot of natural resource work on the site, and we have learned a lot about the natural resource values of these ponds, and we are committed to protecting those values. This current process that we're just kicking off here tonight will determine a plan for the entire 223-acre site. We want to check in on these 2006 plan assumptions and make sure they're still valid. And we also want to take into consideration how to use that additional acreage and consider a more extensive sports complex in this area. We are talking about 3 distinct planning areas for this site: sports complex, nature trails and habitat, and neighborhood park. As Mark said, most people don't recognize how big this site is, and I think that was really helpful how he described it. And especially since so much of it is being farmed for hay right now, you just don't even think of it as a public park. But there's a lot of land out there. And given that, we think that we have enough space for all 3 of these things. And what we're asking all of you is to help us find the right balance between those 3 things. But first, I want to talk a little bit about each 3 of these spaces. So regarding the sports complex, all of Eugene's current artificial turf fields are shared with the school districts. We've done that for years, and it has been a wonderful partnership that has really served the community. It's served the school districts. But as our population has grown and our need for more field space has developed, we just haven't kept pace. We need more space for playing fields such as baseball and softball and soccer and football, lacrosse, ultimate frisbee. We hear it from school districts, from coaches, from parents, from youth sports organizations, and from adult participants. In addition to a lack of field space for those local uses, a lot of these teams have to travel out of town to go to other places to participate in games and tournaments. And we keep hearing from families saying, why don't we have a sports complex here? So we can keep our dollars in this town and not always have to travel. So in 2017, we hired a firm to help us understand what is the local and regional market for a sports complex. And the recommendation came back for 12 to 15 fields is something that this market could easily support. So we've looked across the city, and Golden Gardens provides the best site to accommodate a facility of this size. Because it's such a big space, because of the flat topography, the lack of trees, access to Beltline and Highway 99, there's just a lot going for it. And we recognize that there are likely other sports that could potentially find a home here, court sports such as basketball or pickleball, or we're open to that conversation. Then also the second component is the natural trails and habitat. So beginning with the pond restorations back in 2009, we've continued to invest in the habitat values of Golden Gardens, planting trees and vegetation, managing invasive species, actively monitoring and managing turtle nesting sites for the western pond turtle. And we're proud that our efforts, along with our project partners like ODFW and volunteers, have resulted in one of the largest western pond turtle populations in the entire state. Yeah, right? Um, we also know that the waterways and surrounding habitat are also important refuge for migratory and resident waterfowl, bald eagles, blue and green heron, and songbirds, to name a few. And we remain committed to these efforts and protecting the habitat values of this site. So to that end, we're working with a number of individuals and agencies to understand what the potential impacts to the wildlife habitat are from this additional development and how to mitigate that. Our intent is to establish a significant buffer between the natural area and the developed park amenities, and we're currently doing the research to understand what that buffer should look like. Our consultant team includes biologists and natural resource experts, as well as our in-house ecologists who are very familiar and invested in the natural resource values at Golden Gardens. So the third component is the neighborhood park. And so we know there's a need for neighborhood park amenities in this area. Other neighborhood parks include State Street, Mangan, and Irwin parks, but all those are too far to actually serve the Golden Gardens neighborhood. Neighborhood parks are designed to be walked to or ridden a bike to. And development of neighborhood park facilities at Golden Gardens is actually a #1 priority in our Parks and Recreation System Plan. So the types of amenities that you'd find in a neighborhood park are, children's play areas, picnicking paths, benches, drinking fountain, bike racks. And from the last planning process, we know there's interest in BMX type facilities and a dog off leash area. And this is a really large site for a neighborhood park. Most neighborhood parks are about 4 to 5 acres in size, and the area that we're looking at is about 12 acres. So there could be additional natural areas and paths through the neighborhood park as well. So this shows a little bit about how we think the park can be organized. So this would be the neighborhood park, this area. It looks small on the screen, but that's 12 acres. That's a big piece. And that area is closest to neighboring residents, which makes it easier to get to. And then the natural area, of course, is focused on the ponds. I don't think I need to point that out. And as mentioned earlier, we will establish a buffer around that critical habitat to protect it. Then the sports fields would likely be to the west of the ponds and maybe to the east of the ponds. But again, there'll be a buffer somewhere in there to buffer the ponds. As far as vehicular access, we anticipate that all coming from the north, from Clear Lake Road, to avoid impacts to the neighborhood to the south. Although at some point in time, we're told that North Terry is meant to continue all the way up to Clear Lake Road, and at that time there could be a secondary access off of Terry. So before I hand it over back to Allie, I just wanted to talk a little bit about budget and timing. Some people care about that stuff. So the current available funding for this project is $4.75 million. And this is from a combination of sources: the 2018 bond, the 2006 bond, and system development charge funds. There's also potential for funding from the Eugene Parks Foundation, who is doing fundraising to install outdoor exercise equipment around the city, and the site is being targeted for some of that funding. But to be clear, the $4.75 million that we have is just the tip of the iceberg for what would be needed to develop this entire site. We think that it is enough to get us some of the critical infrastructure, such as access roads, maybe some parking, a field or two, as well as some habitat restoration trails and some park amenities. But it's your engagement in this process that will help determine what the priorities are for development in this first phase. One of the outcomes of our master plan will be a phasing plan and a cost estimate. A site this size will definitely be developed in a series of phases, probably over 10 to 15 years. And so a phasing plan will help us do that in an orderly way and help us understand what the costs will be of each phase so that we can garner our resources. We're not anticipating construction of the first phase until 2026. That gives us plenty of time to fully develop and talk with all of you about the plan, to develop detailed construction drawings, and to solicit partnerships, donations, sponsorships from other groups that may want to contribute to this work. So before I pass it off, I just want to say we're looking to hear from you to help us find the right balance on this site, the balance between developed park and natural areas, the balance between impacts to the neighborhood and what a city-wide amenity like this can do for Eugene, and to help meet our goals around social equity, economic development, and long-term stability. I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to Allie.
Thanks, Carolyn. Hi all, my name's Allie Langley, and I'm working with the team that's working with the city on hearing all of your opinions and gathering broad community input in this process. If we could go to that slide. Thank you. This is the schedule for public involvement for our process here. So we started with stakeholder interviews in the fall, and we are now at the first public meeting and survey launch that you all are attending. We're going to continue with more neighborhood events and targeted conversations or focus groups with some key advocacy organizations for the natural area, the sports complex, and the neighborhood park, and that's going to include local sports program representatives and local equity and access advocacy organizations. And then in the spring, after we have taken all that input and designed 3 possible concepts, we're going to come back to you for a second public meeting and a second survey where you'll get to see how all of that input was used and give us your opinions on what you think of those 3 concepts. From there, we will be narrowing down to 1. It'll probably be an amalgamation of the best of those 3 concepts, and we'll come back to you with that with another public meeting and survey. And throughout this process, we're going to have an advisory group representing, again, those kind of 3 spaces that Carolyn and Mark have talked about, as well as other opportunities for input around town. We'll be doing booths at community events and things like that. All right. So we'll take some brief questions. We've got about, I see some hands already. We'll spend 5 to 10 minutes doing some Q&A, and then we'll transition to group discussions. So, Colin, if you want to come up and run mics, we'll start with a question in the room. I see one over there. And can you just wait a moment until Colin can run over with the mic so that the folks on Zoom can hear you? We've got folks also attending, and we want to acknowledge that we've got a lot of folks online attending the meeting, and thank you so much for engaging with us remotely, and we want to make sure that we get to your questions as well. So we'll alternate, lights, thank you. We'll alternate with questions in the room and questions on Zoom. We've got 54 folks on Zoom and probably about that many in the room, so. You have a question? Yeah. Okay. And hold that mic close to your face if you can.
Hi. I was wondering if Lane County is ever going to want any of that for the fairgrounds, or is theirs farther north and farther east? Or is that even a possibility?
You know, when we first purchased that additional 170 acres, we had an agreement with Lane County that if they wanted to develop their fairgrounds there, that we would work with them to do that. And they decided that they would not be relocating to this area. So that's no longer a plan.
And before we do a question in the room, we'll take one from the Zoom folks. We've got a question about will the construction scare the wildlife? And I want to. We'll take Shelley, if you can introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, I'm Shelley Miller. I'm with Parks and Open Space. I'm taller than everyone else. Yeah, I would say the construction would scare the wildlife. It may be temporary. We are talking about having a buffer, a permanent buffer, and there would be fencing and protections to try to keep wildlife from entering the construction area. But yeah, it would certainly be disruptive for certain wildlife.
Hi, it's great when we build. My issues with maintenance, and I know this is going to be huge. It's going to have a maintenance issue, and how would we go along budgeting that?
It's a great question, Carolyn.
It is a great question. When we, in 2018, when we passed a bond measure that provided funding for this, we also passed a operating levy. And the deal at the time was if the levy didn't, and levy is for operating and maintenance dollars, and bonds are for capital dollars. And so both of those were on the ballot at the same time. And we said, you know what, if the levy doesn't pass, if we don't get the maintenance funding, we won't move forward with the bond. Both passed. So, yay. And so we have in that 2018 levy funding for future development. But here's the catch. Operating levies are only good for 5 years. And so an operating levy, the library is on a levy, and so our levy is actually up next year. And so the deal is that we will need to continue to pass a levy. I will also say that we are looking for more stable, sustainable, long-term funding besides having to do that every 5 years, but for now, that's our plan.
Is there a Zoom question coming in, or was that a Zoom question?
That was an in-person question. We'll take another Zoom question here. We've got a question about, can the park incorporate memorials from those who left the park and those who would like to contribute to the park's assets, such as memorial benches, tables, and that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
We do have a donation program. It's really mostly around benches, and there are 2 benches at the park right now that are memorials to 2 of the boys that drowned. And so that program continues, and we can always look for other opportunities.
There's a section of Jessen Drive east of Golden Gardens that's not currently paved, and I'm just wondering if that's going to be part of this process. Are there any plans about changing that?
That's a good question. You may have sent me that one ahead of time, I think. Okay, well, you're not the only one. Yes, there is an unpaved section of Jessen Drive, and it abuts the park. And this type of discussion comes up a lot. Typically, now we're Parks and Open Space. We're all the city, right? So you're looking to us for the answers. I'm going to answer on behalf of our colleagues at Public Works Maintenance. There are a lot of conditions like that, and typically Public Works Maintenance will partner with the neighbors who live across the street to develop the road. Nowadays, that happens as neighborhoods are built and developed, but there are some like that that are left over. Knowing that, it's unlikely that the neighbors who live directly across from that, and we're neighbors too, right? We own the parkland to the north. We're probably going to work with our Public Works team to see about getting some improvements out there on that road. It's probably the right time to do it when the neighborhood park goes in. But just so that you're aware, it's typically something the cost is borne by all of the immediate tax lot owners on either side of the street. And that's typical all throughout Eugene.
Okay, we're gonna take another Zoom question, and then I think I saw a hand over in that direction. Colin, okay, thanks. Yeah, if you wanna get ready for that. Lots of questions on the Zoom about wildlife, as we've been talking about, and why is infrastructure being placed so close to the wildlife habitat areas? Why not create a 150-foot minimum buffer between the ponds and any new construction? And I'll share that with you, Lori. Sure. I'll repeat the question again. It was, why is infrastructure being placed so close to the wildlife habitat areas with all the available acres? Why not create a 150-foot minimum buffer between the ponds and any new construction?
Hi, everybody. My name's Lori Holtz. I'm one of the ecologists for the City of Eugene Park System, and I do Golden Gardens is one of my sites that I help manage. And there will be a buffer. We don't know exactly what that buffer will be right now. There's a team of consultants as well as staff that are all pulling our heads together in the data that's out there to determine the right buffer. It's likely going to be more than 150 feet, since that was brought up, but we don't know yet what that'll be. But we're committed to protecting the resources that are out there.
Let's go here, and then I'll catch you next.
Yes, as you were talking about the buffer, we live on Wilbur, and this park will be in our backyard, actually. I was just wondering if there would be a buffer along that area of the people that live on Wilbur.
I'm not sure where Wilbur Street is, but I'll just say that it's on the east side. But all of our new park developments, when they happen, have to respond and answer to our own planning code. We actually, even if we are city developers developing our own park, have to jump through all the same hoops that a private developer has to if they want to build a new neighborhood, let's say, or build a road or do something like that. And there are pretty strict and stringent regulations about how close certain facilities can be. It's a very detailed chart. Playgrounds have a buffer distance, lighted fields have a huge buffer distance, and everything in between. So there will be one. I just, at this point in time, it's a little early.
Colin, thanks. You want to go to?
Yeah, you had a question. And then I'll come back to you.
Okay, I lived in that neighborhood for 30 years, so I used to walk down there when it was wild. I saw osprey, fox, rabbits. I used to listen to the ring-necked pheasants call in the field. All of that's gone. The city came in 2006 or 7 and plowed everything under. There was, I want to know, here's my question. My question is, did you do an environmental impact statement before you started turning the ground? Because it was covered with endangered lupin, that was the habitat for the endangered blue butterfly. In 1990, they were all over that park, and now they're gone. So are you keeping up with environmental impact? Sure, you've got a lot of attention to the turtles, but you wiped the endangered butterflies out. That's all I have to say.
Thanks so much. Yeah, the turtles are a concern along with other wildlife, and we'll have Lori or Shelley speak to that. Thank you.
Thanks for your question. I'm going to say I don't know about there being Kincaid's lupin out there. We have a few sites in West Eugene and South Eugene that we're protecting and trying to enhance habitat for Fender's blue butterfly. As far as the environmental impact statement, if you're talking about the federal, there's not a federal nexus per se here in terms of permitting and that sort of thing where we would have to do a formal environmental impact statement, but certainly the work that we're doing with the consultants and in-house, we're trying to minimize those impacts.
Too late.
And I don't know what happened in 2006. That's long before I worked here, but I don't know if anyone else.
I just want to add to remember that in 2006, we were talking about a 40-acre parcel that really didn't extend beyond where the bark path is now, where the farm fields are. And so anything that was done outside of that area in the farm fields was done by private owners at that time.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about right by the ponds.
Thanks for that concern, and I know you're not the only one that's concerned about wildlife and species out there. We're gonna take 2 more questions, and then we're gonna transition to group discussions, and you'll be with city and other staff on this project who are gonna be hearing from you and taking notes about your concerns. But we wanna take 2 more questions. And the next one from Zoom is transportation related. Would there be more pedestrian or vehicle bridges to the existing pond trail system from the southern edge of the park? Currently, the main access is at Golden Gardens Street. What about bridges crossing the water? And some questions about bicycle access and trails.
I think that will be part of this master planning process. So I can definitely see adding additional pedestrian access across the A2 channel, especially on the more western edge of the site. But we will design that together.
And we'll do one more in the room.
Is there any thought about having tribal members gather some of the native plant species?
That's a great question.
Yes, that is a good question. I would say there aren't a lot of, well, there's some native plant species that we know of in the site that we're talking about for the neighborhood park that we're actually hoping to preserve where we can, or maybe enhance even. And I think the other area that's farmed probably has very little native plants, but that could be certainly an option that we could look at if we find some camas or something out there. Yep.
Certain steps in the process may trigger different interactions, but just speaking from the public involvement side of things, we are looking to work with various advocacy groups around the community who have often been underrepresented in planning processes like these over the decades, and make sure that their input is incorporated into this planning process. We're going to transition now to the group discussions. And so for folks on Zoom, you will no longer see this feed probably, and you're welcome to stay on and continue discussing this important issue with Julie on Zoom. And for the folks in the room here, we've got city staff who are going to join tables and work with you on doing first a round of intros and then asking those questions around the room. We want to make sure we hear from everybody, and city staff will be taking notes and capturing high-level points and ideas. So thank you so much for sharing.
All right. So can everybody hear me? Just a thumbs up. Awesome. So we're good. We've got about 15, 20 minutes to talk a little bit more in depth about both some of the questions that you have and really a vision for the future. One basic thing about starting with a concept is to get clear about what that vision is. Also joining us is Carolyn Burke. You saw her on the presentation. There she is on Zoom. That just makes me so happy that you're here, Carolyn. Thank you. And so, Carolyn, I want to circle just first to you. Is there anything from the Q&A that happened in person that you want to elaborate on? And then we'll sort of go to this vision question for folks. Can we hear you?
Sorry, unmute myself. Did you all hear the Q&A?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
We heard it. I heard it. Did everybody else hear it? Yeah.
Okay.
And we got some of our questions out there. So that was fantastic.
Great. Yes, that was great. Boy, anything I would elaborate on? Well, I guess one thing is, there's question about kind of what the existing vegetation is on site, and would we allow native harvesting, or, are there endangered species? We will be doing full assessments of the site. And so understanding, we'll be doing a wetland inventory. We'll be looking for endangered species. I think some of that actually has already happened. That didn't quite get mentioned in the answer, but there will be a really thorough kind of site assessment of what's there now.
Excellent. So yeah, I just really want to open this up because we've been pretty quiet. I see a lot of questions in the chat, a lot of recommendations, and just hearing your voices and understanding where you're coming from. And so feel free to put a hand up. You've got a way to do that in those Zoom controls, but you can also just jump in. Who's brave?
I'll ask my question. I was just curious why the timeline is so long. I have a very sports active middle schooler right now. We've been in the neighborhood for 18 years, and she will be a junior in high school when this starts and probably be married and having kids by the time it's done.
Yeah, I understand that. You probably heard talking about actually breaking ground in 2026. It is a ways out there. We do have a lot of planning to do. In addition to being a large site and a lot of interests in the site, there's also actually a lack of kind of urban services. This area was just recently brought into the urban growth boundary. And so there's a lot of transportation enhancements that need to be made. If there will be restrooms, we need to get sewer out there. So it's a pretty raw piece of land, and there's a lot that has to happen, and there's a lot that we need to understand about how it gets developed. And then the other important point, I guess I would add, is that we really do hope that we can find partners, sponsors, and donors to help contribute to this project, because it is big. And if we take so after the master plan is developed, that's a great time to do fundraising, because people are inspired, hopefully, by the plan. And if we can find that, then phase one can actually be more than what we're currently thinking it is, just based on the city's contribution. So hopefully we'll be able to find some investors. It's not the right word, but some people to partner with us.
Yeah, Leanne.
So I am not an ecologist, but I am very concerned about wildlife and wild species. And I used to work in smoking cessation back in the 80s. And I remember when restaurants and offices were creating non-smoking areas, as if in some manner the smoke would not permeate the non-smoking areas. And this whole discussion of a vague barrier reminds me of that. If you're a bald eagle, if you're a heron, if you're a field mouse, a barrier does not protect you from what's going on in terms of construction and garbage and light pollution and sound pollution. And I really would like a clearer idea about what kind of barrier, because everything that was said was vaguer and vaguer about what we don't know what that barrier is. I can't see anything as a barrier that's going to protect wildlife.
Good question. And the term that we were using is actually buffer. And so
Wrong word.
yeah, and so it's not necessarily like a barrier to keep things in and keep things out. Although I think Shelley did mention during construction, there may be some fencing that is more barrier than just buffer. But by buffer, what we mean is like a good long distance. And one person, recommended 150 feet. I'm thinking it's going to be more than that. I mean, I would think be the absolute minimum. The reason we can't give you an answer is because we're still studying this ourselves. We're working with ODFW, we're working with our private consultants. We're looking at research to understand what a good buffer distance is and how that would be applied to the site. So it's not that we're trying to not be transparent. It's just that we haven't done that work yet. We're still doing that work. And so, yeah, it's not meant to be a barrier where, nothing can pass through. And regarding light pollution and sound pollution, I do think that we can really look at the positioning of lights in the field. What fields are lit? How do we position those so that they don't go into the natural area? Can we shield those so that, technology and lighting has gotten pretty good where it's really focused now and doesn't kind of bleed out so much. That said, I don't want to make it sound like there won't be light. They're big, they're big field lights. But we have a lot of work to do there to kind of understand what that looks like.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Carolyn. And Thomas, thanks for doing the hand raise. Yeah. Any thoughts from you?
Yes, couple of things. One is this, can you hear me all right?
We hear you great.
Okay. The sound from the sports fields, I don't know how you're going to prevent that from coming into the pond area, the nature area of people walking. We were just there this afternoon, and it's a very quiet, contemplative place. And once you have all those sports fields, you're going to have a lot of noise, which is, to me, is going to ruin a lot of the ambiance of the nature area. That's one thing. The other thing is Jessen Drive. That's been bad forever. And I don't know how it got left out when they paved the rest of the road. And I think it's a crime to try and penalize the people that live there, to have them pay for it. If they're going to build a park, it ought to be part of the park funding. That's it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Carolyn, you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I I agree with Thomas. It definitely needs to be addressed. Normally, that would happen by the developer when the street was first developed and when those houses first, that subdivision went in. I don't know why it didn't happen then. Usually, at least they would have built half of the street and then the park would have been responsible for the other half. There's got to be a history there. And since I'm not in transportation, I don't understand it. And I understand that it feels really unfair to kind of penalize the few residents that live along there, because that's a lot of money. I think parks is part of the solution there, and as far as paving that, and so we'll be looking at that.
Thank you. I wanted to turn to Catherine. You did a great job describing your vision. Would you want to share that verbally? Let me just go ahead and describe it. She said, my ideal Golden Garden Park includes easy walk pathways, supported natural areas, abundant native plants, seating throughout, picnic tables, informative signs about the area's history and wildlife, similar to Delta ponds. Also, little to no 24 light pollution, especially in regards to a possible sports arena. So, you know, one thing I notice about that is you've got a level of detail in there about 24-hour. And Carolyn, you want to talk a little bit about lighting and time frame? That's still down the road, but yeah, how have you managed that elsewhere?
Yeah, you're right. It is a ways down the road here, and I think we can be pretty adaptive in how we do use lighting here. I think it's likely that some fields there would be a desire to light some fields, just because, especially in, you know, times when it gets dark around 5 or 6 p.m., you know, we want to be able to still use those fields. I think in other areas around town, those lights go off. I don't know. I don't actually know if it's 9 or 10. But there is the ability to, you know, program that to have, certainly not 24-hour lighting, but also just to be reasonable for the people that live in the area, and also for the wildlife. So we'll definitely be looking at that.
Excellent. And then just to follow up, again, this is detail, but it really is the kind of thing people think about, is that sense of the turf being artificial, or would it be grass? Like how are we thinking about that?
Another really good detailed question. We would like to actually do a triple bottom line analysis. And what that means is kind of assessing the impacts and the benefits of artificial turf versus grass fields from an environmental standpoint, from a economic standpoint, and also from a social equity standpoint. So really doing a thorough analysis to understand what are the materials we're using and making really good decisions around it. I can tell you there will be a lot of interest from sports community to have artificial turf, because as we all know, it gets pretty wet in Eugene for a lot of the year, and artificial turf makes it playable year round. I do think there's a question though, do all the fields need to be turf, and what are the different impacts around that? And what are the, you know, as I said, environmental costs and social equity. So it is still an unknown. We'll be looking into that further. And we want to hear from you.
Excellent. So I would love, is there anybody related to sports online? And it would be great to just get your perspective and hear your thoughts.
Maybe JB, I see something about Shasta Fields from JB.
May have stepped
Hello?
out. Hello.
Hi. So my perspective on the sports part of it, just because I coach, a lot of times, like especially with, I think someone had said the Shasta fields not being utilized. A lot of times that's the reason is because, like someone had said, we live in a wet state, a very wet state. And so a lot of those fields are not usable during those winter months. And even in the early springs are difficult to get those fields ready. And I know there is a lot of softball teams out there or baseball teams that are looking for field usage that early, but sometimes are not able to use it because the fields aren't ready.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. Thank you. Brandy, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, my daughter actually plays soccer year round. She plays club soccer. She plays kids sports soccer. She's done track. So that's the reason my concern for the timeline, since she'll be a junior in high school when it starts. But turf is definitely hard to come by, and is really needed. The grass fields, when it gets really wet and rutted, is really dangerous for injuries. A lot of torn ligaments, ACLs, and all that just from the ruts in the grass. We were at a game a few months ago up by Portland, and we had really bad ruts in the grass field, and we had a girl actually injure her back and get taken away in an ambulance just because the field condition was so bad.
Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective and recognize those challenges. Josh. Are you there, Josh? Are you unmuting?
Yes, I had to figure out where the unmute button was.
Congrats.
So my question is, why couldn't we just do artificial fields at the Shasta fields or at the Meadowview fields if that's the concern? And that way you would get a usable space in an otherwise non-usable field that would normally be wet. And I would love if we could address the sound pollution issues that was asked earlier that wasn't answered.
And we're capturing those notes. So thank you so much, note takers, and thank you all for sharing. You got 5 more minutes. Let's hear from you. Thank you.
Sorry, just got really loud here. Josh, good question about Shasta and Meadowview. Those I think, well, number one, they're softball and baseball fields. And so it wouldn't address the need around the rectangle fields for football and soccer and cross and ultimate. And the other thing is having fields dispersed around the community, it makes it more difficult to host tournaments. It makes it more difficult to maintain. So having this one central area is a real benefit. That's not to say though that your idea, that it wouldn't be a good idea to think about improving the Shasta ball fields and the Meadowview fields to be put in turf. I think it's a good suggestion. Noise pollution. I guess I do want to understand just how noisy it will be. We're probably not talking, huge crowds here because there won't be that many spectators. It's not like an M Stadium kind of thing with, loudspeakers and things like that. I think of it is not being that noisy, but and I'm thinking about the other fields that we have around town, and we don't get a lot of noise complaints. So that doesn't mean that noise isn't an issue and something to consider how it would impact our wildlife. I just don't have that answer, but we will be looking into it. Part of the problem with having this meeting this early in the process is we don't have a lot of answers for you because we're just that early in the process.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. And we are running close on time. And Teresa?
Sorry, angry baby. I was going to echo what the last few comments are, is that when I'm listening to what people are saying so far, there's a lot of people that are really concerned about the wildlife, but not a lot of people have been saying much about the sports area. So is it that the sports area needs to be here? It's a great idea that we started with, but if more people are concerned about the wildlife preservation and the things that we could do to increase that, there are so many unused fields around town, and I know it's inconvenient to not have them all in the same space, but could we consider that maybe our funding would be better used toward upkeeping of the playing fields that are around town, like the suggestion at Shasta, or like Irwin Park has one, State Street Park has one, and they're not used and they're not safe. Exactly for what she was saying about, ankles, torn ACLs, all those things. But if we have so many people who are more concerned about the wildlife part, should that remain more of the focus and not this sports arena? I guess maybe we have to go back to the people and ask the people really, what do they want for their neighborhood area?
Thanks, Teresa. I think that is part of this process. Carolyn, you have any more thoughts on that before we go probably to our last question?
Well, I just think people involve themselves in different ways, and I'm not participating at the tables today, so I don't know if there's a lot of sports people maybe that are here in person or what. I can tell you that through the years we have heard again and again and again just how short of sports fields we are in our community, and that's a problem for youth, for health, for participation. I heard one coach say that the trying to get practice field time is like a full contact sport for kids sports. Like there just is not enough space. However, that said, the sports supporters are going to have to come out in this process and show that it truly is a need, because if we don't hear from them, then you're absolutely right. Then we will need to reconsider. But I fully expect that we will be hearing from them.
Yeah, Karen.
Yes, currently the fields are providing vegetation that's fodder for migrating birds. I've been at Golden Gardens and seen the fields covered with Canadian geese, and I suspect that there are a number of other birds that feed it. And I'm more interested in keeping this as a wildlife habitat than a sports complex. And I've been reading the comments of other people. Yes, I can hear the noise from these other ballparks. And if you are going to have a ballpark here, I'd like to see you plant vegetation in the rest of the fields that would support wildlife and migrating birds. That's all I have to say.
All right, thank you, Karen. I think we're now going to cut back to the in-person.
What stood out to you today? What new insights came out of this conversation? Any aha moments or surprises? Anything like that? Looking to any note takers. Yep. Let's wait till we get you on the mic. Thank you so much for the folks on Zoom.
Testing. Okay. Two things. A big consensus on preserving the natural space, the natural area. That seemed to be a number one priority. Although support for all the other uses too, as long as they're pushed to the outskirts of the property. And then the second thing I was surprised in our group is to learn that the Bethel School District owns a lot of the acreage and land right next to Golden Gardens Park. And they want to be included, the superintendent wants to be included as part of the partnership of that planning, so.
Thank you. Thanks so much. How about let's hear from another group. Note takers.
Craig. Yeah, certainly the most interest in preserving the wildlife area. And some unique parts is also understanding, I think this came up once, is that what type of turf the fields might be, and a concern about artificial turf in that way. And then also understanding that it could be a gem of a facility if it were all three of the pieces were put together in that area. But I think the greatest concern would be the close-in neighbors and the impact on their own space.
Thank you, Craig.
it's not surprising that we're also in favor of keeping the environment intact as much as possible. I think the agreement around the board is having an environmental statement to some degree would be really beneficial so that we all understand where we're coming from. We all know what's going to happen if we do impact this space and how important it is to preserve that. And we still like sports.
Thank you, Alexis. Laurel, your group.
All right, the folks at our table were all community members or neighbors right around the park. So it was really awesome to be able to hear concerns that they had, but then also some creative enhancements that they had around, such as pedestrian bridges, maybe in some areas to help access different trails in some areas, different things like that to really enhance the ebb and flow of those areas. And then similar to maintenance of the turf is just with the wildlife around the turf, what is the ability to be able to clean the turf, keep it clean, and all of that, as a lot of people have seen different areas in the community that have goose poop and different things like that on it. I know a lot of you laugh, you must have all talked about it too, but how to kind of keep those areas clean in conjunction with the wildlife.
Victor?
I'll go.
Colin, we'll take Mark's takeaways and then go back to you.
Sorry, Mark, for skipping over you.
No, I got a mic. I'm good. I'll take over. Our group is over here in the corner. I'm sorry I left you at the table there. And we did lose a couple people. And I think I made a best friend, and I already forgot your name. I'm sorry. But the one surprising thing that everybody mentioned that they heard was that they like the sports too. Don't get me wrong. Everybody at our table wants to protect and preserve our natural area and our habitat, ranging all the way down to the point of saying what the ideal would be to have no people. And that's I wouldn't laugh because there's if you go to that park. I go to the park. I go there a lot, and it's very peaceful and quiet in the morning. Very quiet. I can understand and relate to that very well. So, everything from all the sports items that we're talking about was brought up and discussed. And another aha moment or thing that came up from a new member to the community who just moved here a few years ago, which was, hey, is this a done deal, or are we just doing this meeting to have the meeting, or something along those lines? And we're not. And in fact, where's my new best friend now? Because he actually spoke up for us, for the city, because we really try hard to come out and make sure we listen to the community and understand what the problems and the needs are so that we can find that right balance. It's about finding the right balance so that we can protect the resources we have. Colin, you're up.
Let's go to this table. Victor, do you want to go? Or do you
Yeah, my name is Victor, and I had the joy of listening to my group. A lot of them put a lot of emphasis in the natural aspect and how that relates to the broader, ecological region. There was discussions about trails, paved trails, soft trails. They are also excited for other people from the area to come in, and they were excited to include not just one bathroom that's centered, but like access to multiple restrooms across the site. There's also concern of traffic on Wilbur. Another thing that was really interesting was a community center, and thinking about that, and where people can, get together and have all these programs. But also thinking about the bigger picture and like scoping out what 30 years would look like in this area, especially knowing that we have Craig here, the superintendent. He would like to partner with the Bethel School District and seeing how they can do a community center or just explore different ideas. But yeah, overall supportive of the neighborhood park, the sports complex, but also like preserving the natural existing wildlife.
Thank you, Victor. Shelley?
Hi, all. Shelley Miller again, Parks and Open Space. And thanks to my group, we had a good conversation. Similarly, people were interested in habitat as a priority, and I promise I didn't skew the results on that. But people were really also interested in the neighborhood park and sort of that combination or integrating the habitat at the neighborhood park. A couple people said that, and just thinking about how that might happen. And I know we're short on time, so I'll just mention too, there were comments about budget and where is the budget going to come from and how long is it going to sit empty, and also just creating something that's both budget friendly and family friendly across the site.
And I can jump in from the folks on Zoom. There's a lot of people on Zoom, and we had a really good conversation there as well. Similar, I think, theme is there's a lot of interest in preserving the area for natural uses and just preserving the habitat value of the site. Concerns about light pollution, questions about lighting of the fields, concerns about sound pollution and how loud will it be and what impact will that have. Some great detailed questions like about will it be artificial turf or natural grass and what are the impacts there, and what about some of the other sports fields in the areas, could those potentially be transferred to artificial turf and to protect this area here. And I think I'll leave it at that, but I think I covered most of it. Thank you. And now I'm going to hand it back to Mark.
Actually, I forgot one group,
Okay,
so I didn't
we
want to
got
leave
one
them
more.
out, but Lori, if you could go.
Thank you, Lori Holtz, Parks and Open Space. I just wanted to add all the things that were already brought up were mentioned, but we did have a couple other ideas, a lot of interest in native plants. Can we do pollinator habitat, oak prairie restoration, community garden came up. Also a concern about safety and homelessness, concern about lighting and noise and all that stuff as well. Also a really strong interest in providing more activities, outdoor activities, not just sports for youth. Bouldering, providing even like a parkour, things like that the Bethel children can get out and do some activities that aren't available to them currently. The Y was brought up, and the fact that, the Y hasn't been developed in that part of town, and we know that's slated for a different location, but there was definitely a strong interest in youth, and I just wanted to bring that up since that wasn't kind of called out with any of the other groups.
Thank you, Lori. So all of our groups have reported back, correct, Colin? Okay, great. So we're at the end. I'm not going to go ahead and use that next slide because we'd have to turn off the lights and that. I've got another little trick here. Our next steps, and your next steps, we're going to ask you to take the survey. So that will be live online. I will try to turn that on right after this meeting and make that live. If you prefer not to use the technology, the online technology, we do have hard copy surveys available. You're welcome to take one of those and then turn it back in. We do have a sign up. So when you get to the landing page for Golden Gardens, on the top right-hand side of the screen is a sign up, and then you get all those great emails and notices from myself that say, hey, we have 3 concept plans up online. Take a look at them. Come to our next meeting, things of that nature. And actually, let me back up one. Everybody gave really good feedback, and it's super difficult for us to summarize all of that very quickly here as we stand up. So if you didn't hear your comment and input come back in our reporting here, please know that the reason we take notes is because we're going to pull together meeting minutes from this and put all that together and online so that we capture all the feedback. So you'll get to hear what the other groups talked about, what their priorities were, things of that nature, so that it's all captured. It's all part of public record, so we do that. So I'm sorry for that little aside. If you have trouble navigating or getting to the website, there is a QR code on just about every piece of literature. that's why I brought this, that is out there, including on your way out, you'll see on the back of all the banners that we're directing you in here, and apologies, we know it was difficult to find the inside of this room, we'll do better next time, but on the back of all those banners is a QR code, so you can scan that with your phone, and that'll take you to the website. You can start doing the survey or do it later when you get home, you'll have that. So thank you. I want to acknowledge our team, our staff from the city. I'm not going to mention everybody by name. I'd like to thank our local landscape architecture team of Cameron McCarthy and Cojito, who is online monitoring our Zoom right now and also doing a lot of our public outreach. It takes a village. We have a village on this side, and you're part of our village, and we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you at the next meeting. So thank you very much. We're going to be wrapping up. Thank you. And cleaning up, and you're welcome to barrage us with additional questions until we run out the door.
Please take some more food and browse the materials on your way out and grab a staff member if you have more questions. Thank you so much.